Right.
All
Hi,
right, we're
Kyle.
recording. Here we go.
We're here. Thank you for doing this with me. Yeah, I just wanted to chat about state of affairs of things and yeah, just kind of give some insight to the experience that you've had and just the experience of what it's like to work as a Black choreographer right now in all the spaces that you've been occupying and yeah, just your experience in that. And yeah, maybe it's good for those people who don't know about you if I read a little bit of your resume
Oh,
from your website.
do it up.
So, recently featured in O, the Oprah magazine, Kinfolk, and Vogue Italia, 2018 Princess Great Statue Award recipient and Lincoln Center Education Artist in Residence. Kyle Abraham is a 2013 MacArthur Fellow and 2016 Doris Duke recipient who began his dance training at the Civic Light Opera Academy and the Creative and Performing Arts High School in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He continued his dance studies in New York, receiving a BFA from SUNY Purchase and an MFA from NYU Tisch School of the Arts, an honorary doctorate in fine arts from Washington Jefferson College, and is currently serving as a visiting professor in residence at UCLA. Mr. Abraham is the founding director, artistic director of AIM, an American contemporary dance company created in honor his history, experiences, and artistic interests. In November 2012, Abraham was named the newly appointed New York Live Arts Resident Commission Artist for 2012 through 2014. Just 1 month later, Alvin American Dance Theater premiered Abraham's newest work, Another Night, at New York City Center to rave reviews. That same year, Abraham was named the 2012 Jacobs Pillow Dance Award recipient and 2012 United States Artist Ford Fellow, before serving as choreographic contributor for Beyonce's 2013 British Vogue cover shoot. It goes on and on. Won a Bessie Award, Dance Magazine Top 25 to Watch, has created work for Hubbard Street Dance Chicago, the Paul Taylor American Dance Company, and for Misty Copeland of ABT. Also has made more work for Ailey, the New York City Ballet, for former principal dancer Wendy Wayland, and in 2011, Out Magazine labeled Abraham as the best and brightest creative talent to emerge in a New York City in the age of Obama. Very major. So, with all of
as you're saying that, I'm like, just like moving around. I'm like, oh, it's talking about me. Let me just move my body. I can't focus.
Well, I guess first, yeah, how does it feel to hear all of those things around your name?
I mean, I don't know. It's great. It's funny. It's like I'm like, oh wow, that was this year. That was that year. You know, it's like it's just funny just thinking about time. You know, like 2018. Oh my god, like 2018 kind of feels like yesterday in some ways. In other ways, it's like when you say it, I'm like, wow, that was so much has happened for a lot of us.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess maybe we can just start with talking about how you started. Like I remember like one of the first places that we interacted was like Springboard in like 2008 when you were like an emerging choreographer there. And for those who don't know, Springboard Dance Montreal is a dance program during the summer for kind of pre-professional, professional dancers wanting to kind of start their career and meet companies internationally and nationally. So yeah, can you just like kind of talk about your beginning and when things kind of started to progress for you?
Sure, yeah. I'll try and do it like Cliff Notes version. So I started, I think, honestly, when I first started studying dance, I thought about being a choreographer. I think part of that was because I started to me like late, you know, like 17. It was like my senior year in high school. So I just was much more focused on making um, from, I guess, day one, I guess, of that process. But after going to college for dance and focusing on choreography, I wound up dancing for a dance company. And when I did, I realized while I was there, I was like, this isn't what I wanted to do. And I think it's that thing that happens to a lot of people when they're in college in particular, or some kind of conservatory program, you see everyone else kind of trying to get these dance jobs that you think that's what you want to do too, even if that wasn't your trajectory.
Mm.
So I kind of got lost in that for a minute before kind of taking a break from dance, only to eventually make my way back to it by going to grad school and trying to figure out my place in New York and with the dance community in some way. And while I was there, I made a lot of dances and formed the company, working with dancers that I met undergraduate at Purchase or dancers that were in the grad program at NYU, or people that were dancing like around the city that I met either from taking open classes on the weekends or dancing for people like Kevin Wynn, who's one of my idols and someone I got to dance for a brief period of time. And that's what formed the company. So I had been making work during that time. That's like 2005, 2006 period, and just continued to try to hustle. It definitely was a challenge for a good while, and it's a challenge now, but in different ways. But I think the first kind of one of the first bigger breaks happened around that 2008 time, right after Springboard. I did a program at what was then called Dance Theater Workshop, which is now New York Live Arts.
Mm.
It was a split bill with myself and an artist, Laird Thompson, where we both kind of shared an evening. And I did a group work and a solo work. And in some ways, the early sketches of that came from what I was playing with or working on in Springboard in Montreal.
Gotcha.
Both in the solo and the duet now that I think about it. Yeah, but then from there, Judy Hussey Taylor from Dance Space Project saw my work and we got to talking, and she offered me a program to do an evening of my own work at Dance Space, which would have been February of 2010.
Mm.
And that program really just shifted things for me in a really great way. That was a program of mine called The Radio Show.
Okay.
And the company started touring a lot after that process. We also started working with Sophie Mercer-McCordy as our booking agent. So of course that definitely played a major part in the fact that we started touring.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk about that, about how you met your booking agent and, you know, what the steps were to get her to work for you? And
Sure, with me, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I think Sophie and I first connected. I reached out to some presenter friends of mine, so different kind of directors of theaters, to talk to them about who they thought maybe someone I should reach out to, or someone that they thought was really great at their job. And Sophie was one of the people that I'd reach out to. Yeah, I reached out to Sophie. I reached out to this guy, Ben Pryor. Both of them were working at Pensacola at the time. So I first started out with Sophie when she was at Pensacola. And then when she went solo, a la Beyonce, I started working with her. I just really believed in what she was doing and believed in the artists that she wanted to support. And so I was one of her first artists that she had in Lotus Artist Management, which is her agency that she runs now.
cool. And for those who are kind of in that same trajectory, can you talk about like money a little bit and just like, you know, did you have to hire her and like, you know, where you got this money from to find
Right.
the resources to get someone, you know, to do this, to work with you?
Yeah. Sure. I guess maybe that's a part of the story that I didn't mean to skip over. But the first, when I said I mentioned two people, Ben Pryor and Sophie, my first conversation actually was with Ben, because Ben was also doing American Realness, a really great festival in New York. Was happening during that time and getting a lot of attention and buzz. And I had already connected with Ben, and we presented an excerpt of a work of mine called Live Realist MC in his festival. But when I was talking with Ben when he was at Pentacle, they have this thing called the gallery, which you pay for. I feel like maybe at that time, I could be totally wrong on numbers, so I don't know what the dollar amount was, but you paid maybe, I don't have no idea. I would say something and it could be totally wrong, so I don't want to say a number. But you paid some fee, and they weren't necessarily getting on the phone to like talk to presenters about your work, but they would put your materials out in front on their table when they went to conferences, and you'd be listed on their website. So like there was that, or you could try and be a roster artist. And I just needed that first period of time to think about it all the more because I really didn't have the money like at all. I don't even really know how I was paying my rent half the time. I definitely lucked out with my living situation. I've had a lot of good luck with Craigslist. I know it's sketchy. I know it's supposed to be sketchy, and I definitely think the way I got into that apartment was really. I mean, it was a crapshoot. I like found something on Craigslist, met up with some guy, paid him some money, and turns out that guy had nothing to do with the building. But I got in that apartment and I lived there for 7 years. I lived alone, paid $800 rent in Borum Hill
Wow.
for my own place. But clearly, yeah, I mean, it was a small place, but nevertheless. But to get more to the point, I definitely couldn't think about spending that kind of money that I didn't have at that point to be in that gallery. So I needed to think about it a little bit more. And then Sophie, my now agent, a guy Doug Post and Ben Pryor, a bunch of folks from Pensacola came to see the radio show when we presented it at Dance Space Project. And I just was like, oh wow, that's so nice that they came to see my work. Like that means a lot. And they had a retainer. So like when you sign, you pay a retainer, and then you are also paying a percentage of the, they take a commission on anything that they're booking. And so I think at that time, I was, I think, I mean, I started doing, I changed my whole kind of planning process. I started doing a thing for myself where I would look at the year, 2 years out, and try to make sure that I could figure out how my rent could be paid for 2 years at a time. And I would still make little, like, I'd keep a little space in there so that there could be like random good opportunities that could come up in that time. But for the most part, that was the thought that like I needed to do that. And so somehow in doing that while also applying for grants, I was still a Pennsylvania resident at that time, even though I had a place in New York. I was still going back and forth and presenting my work there as best I could, and wanting to keep my vote there because Pennsylvania. So somehow I think it just worked out, and I think the retainer wasn't that high. So I think that was also a thing at the time. And I think I've been pretty good with money, so I think that was probably. I mean, I say that, but I do not come for money. Let's just be clear. It'd be more like, okay, if I'm making a work and I know that there is a small commission fee that I'm going to get, how can I stretch that out, and how can I kind of play with what that money is in some way, while still thinking about that timeline that I put for myself for making sure my rent was paid.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of what happened. And then by the time Sophie went solo, I had more to play with in a way, because I think her retainer needed to be higher than what Pentacles was, because she was independent.
Right.
And I wanted to really support her, and so however I could as an artist. So yeah, I think there was a little bit of that by the time that she went solo. I feel like I don't even know what year that might be, but it definitely, if I'm correct, I think it was by the time I'd already got the MacArthur. So definitely a game change by that point.
Got you.
So I definitely had more resources to be playing with.
And yeah, I guess, can you speak about, because I know at that time, I feel like I was also with you that week when you won the MacArthur, because you were premiering something for Body Traffic.
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, just talking about like, when you started getting commissions from, companies in the States, and how that kind of happened, and what you think kind of led. I mean, obviously your work up until that point led to that, but if there was like kind of a trigger that was like got you on people's radar.
Yeah, it could very well be that the radio show. It could also be sometimes just saying things out loud. And I definitely, Lord knows there's hardly any filter here. So I think maybe that was part of it. Yeah, I mean, I would be looking at some of my friends, like Sidra Bell, one choreographer and good friend. I was like, oh, she's doing a lot of, I want to do commissions, you know, and then like it happens. I'm like, oh wait, I want to do all these commissions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely like really think about what you're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think both that experience in 2008 and giving that opportunity that I had by Carla Peterson, who was doing the curating at Dance Theater Workshop at the time. I think that really helped in some ways. I was presenting work at Dance Now, Dance Now NYC, like um, just looking for different performance opportunities
Mm-hmm.
and applying as best I could to those different opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So I think things like that. And then when the radio show happened, there was a really great review of the work in the audience. I mean, when that show opened, the second night of that show, it was a snowstorm. I actually, maybe it was the first night, I just like cried. I was like, I don't know who these people are. I have goosebumps right now. So many tattoos. I don't know if you'd see them. But yeah, I just was like, I don't know who these people are seeing this show. But it was just so moving.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's just like so much word of mouth, like positive word of mouth really helped to make that happen. But at the same time, I was also still applying for a lot of grants. And I think the thing for people to know is, yes, it's great to get the grants, but it's also really important to just be on the to have your work be seen by whoever those panelists are.
Yeah.
Those panelists may advocate for you in the years to come.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes tell students when I'm doing talks here in New York about when I got turned down for Fresh Tracks in New York. You know, it's like a great opportunity. So many wonderful choreographers have come through that lineage, and you know, it's like something you hear about all the time, especially at the time that I was applying for it. But the same day that I found out I didn't get Fresh Tracks, I found out that I was going to be doing Fall for Dance, which pays so much more. So many more people can see the work.
Yeah.
And the following year, I was the poster boy for Fall for Dance.
Mm-hmm.
And that wouldn't have been possible if I was doing Fresh Tracks. I would have had to turn down this other thing.
Right.
You know, and the thing is that like one of those panelists was part of Fall for Dance. So you just never know who's in the room. And everything leads to everything. Right. So it's just trying to put your work out there as best you can in spaces that you feel like can best support your vision and what you want to do.
Got you. Cool. So within that, can you speak about your experience? I guess once you started making these, getting more commissions, can you start to talk about, your experience as a Black choreographer? I was kind of doing some research and I saw that you and Alonzo King are the only two Black choreographers who have choreographed at Hubbard Street outside of the Hubbard Street Dance Company. I think Jonathan Fredrickson is the only other, and Renae now
Yeah,
are the
Renae
only
Preston
two.
Butler, my sister.
Yeah.
I
And also, I think that you are the only Black choreographer to choreograph on New York City Ballet. I think Alonzo has also choreographed for them, but I don't think it made the main stage.
Oh no, they've had. I think I am like the 7th.
Really?
I think I'm the first in like 10 years or something like that.
Who are some others?
Oh, well, you put a brother on the spot.
Yeah, because I was really trying to look, and I'm like, I don't see.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that just because you have to be really careful with when you. It's right. Like what's that? Rebel Wilson. She's like, I'm the first plus size. Could be like, no, you're not, sis. But yeah, I don't know. I know Albert Evans made something, but it wasn't on the main stage, I don't think. But Ulysses Dove, of course. Yes. Red Angels. I think, shoot, I don't know them all. I think the thing that I definitely want to make sure is part of the conversation, I think that they've been hearing, is just, sure, I'm one of however many brothers, but we're the sisters, which is a whole other conversation with me when I think about ballet in particular or just dance in general. I'm just like, it's interesting to me that so many opportunities can be given to men, because I just think in my mind there's so many more women in the field, but I think that's a whole other kind of training, right? Like how much support are you giving and encouragement are you giving to everyone when you are kind of encouraging people to look into choreography.
Mhm.
I hear so many different takes on that. Talking to Wendy Whalen a good amount, sometimes it's just like what happens when the men aren't doing these other classes. Like women have to take point class, and they're doing all these other variations classes that maybe the men don't have.
Right.
Um, I don't know, and I of course cannot make an excuse for an industry that I'm not fully a part of. I can
Right.
only say that part of what I like to do is try and find ways to include my sisters whenever I can. So
Mhm.
that's a thing, and I think everyone knows that. So I don't need to, be trying to pat myself on the back or whatever. So I don't really know. I think that's more the conversation is like where are the women in the field? But I think people are aware of that, and I think that's going to change. I definitely know of a commission that was about to change that game in some way that I can't get into because it's top secret, even though I'm chatty Cathy. But I think had COVID not happened, I think maybe some of those changes would have happened
Mhm.
for some companies this year. But yeah, I think maybe I cut you off in the middle of that question about being a black male choreographer
Well,
doing
yeah,
something.
just once you are in these rooms, can you kind of just speak about kind of the conversations that happen behind the scenes, and like if they ask you, or if you feel a pressure to produce something that will be accessible to those audience but also true to yourself, and kind of what it felt like to use Lil Wayne and these more contemporary songs in your music for such a huge white institution.
Sure, yeah, thanks. I mean, I think like working at the ballet, that one was city ballet in particular, that created a lot of different types of challenges for me, um because I felt like I was responsible for a lot. Like I
Yeah.
felt like maybe like if I messed up, would another brother or sister get another chance? Maybe not, you know. But I definitely felt very supported
Mm.
by everyone there and the people that I try to keep as close to me as I can. My lighting designer is one of those people, Dan Scully. He's worked with me for the last 14 years, 16 years. Oh my God, it's 2016 or 2020. Yeah, he's worked with me since 2004. So it's been
Uh,
16 years. And he will tell me if something's garbage. And I appreciate that. Like he
mhm.
does it respectfully. He's a good guy. And the dancers too. Taylor Stanley, who people definitely know. He and I have a really great working relationship. And he's a really humble guy. But if I ask Taylor his input, I think he'll tell me what he thinks, and it's really important. As did Rebecca Crone, who was the ballet mistress there on The Runaway. So that's really important. But there's a lot that kind of goes through my mind. It's like, with that commission in particular, it's like people don't know my history. They don't know that I started out playing classical music.
Uh,
So they don't know that I know, like I know a lot of classical music. They don't know that.
mhm.
Um, but it shouldn't be about what they know or don't know about me, right? Like it shouldn't be that I have to prove something.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of just like black tax. Like you always feel like you got to prove something.
Yeah.
And being a black gay man, I feel like I got to prove things to everybody. I feel like I got to prove something to my brothers. Like I feel like I got to prove something to whomever else.
Mhm.
Um, and I accept some of that because I think ultimately within that, it's a lot of questioning within myself to think about what do I want to say, and how much power am I giving these other voices, eyes or ears, to influence who I am and what I make. Um, and so I think in some ways that definitely played a part in the ballet. And I think I tried to address it head on with the way in which I used the music, using both Nico Muhly and Kanye and James Blake.
Mhm.
Um, but at Hubbard Street, I think it's a different conversation, right? Because there have been conversations around that the company and talking to Glenn quite openly about the dancers there and about different opportunities there. I wanted to think about what I could present and how I'd want to present it. Um, but I always feel safe when I'm there. I think there's something about the community that they create that always feels encouraging. I think the dancers there are super supportive, And Glenn is too. It's like if I just finished making a ballet that was really celebrated with me using popular music, one would think he would want me to make a piece using popular music. But I was like, no, I want to use German later songs. And he's like, okay. There was no resistance there at all. Yeah, I think like maybe more to the question, there's this thing that can come up at times about like certain spaces may want you to make a pause piece where it's just something that goes in the middle of the program. Maybe it's a little safer. Sometimes they're looking for a closer, which is complicated in some ways because I do think sometimes about race with this idea of a closer. I'm like, oh, what? I can't make something heady. I have to make something that is, I need to bring out my drums and put on my tap shoes. Like, is that what you're saying to me? And me thinking that, of course, is in no way derogatory towards drummers or tap artists because, but like, it's that thing. It's like, what are you trying to say here? So, but those are all conversations that go through my head and go through my mind. And at the same time, when I'm asked to make a pause piece, I'm thinking, what, you think I can't close the program? You know what I mean? It's such a layered thing. But I think the more opportunities that we're given, I think you have to go into, nobody has to do anything. But what I try to do a lot of times is go into these companies and think this is my first time out of the gate with some of them. And I think there's a little bit of playing it safe sometimes that first time out. And the second time, there's a little bit more trust that's established, both on the administrative side, also on the artistic, and I guess if there's a third part, on the audience side to kind of just trust the journey that I might try and take them on. I was saying yesterday in a Zoom thing for my summer intensive that the first time I made a piece at Ailey, I was asked to make one of those pause, they call it pause ballet, and I talked to Mazuma Chaya about music and just what I was going to make, and he was like, I really think you should think about maybe trying to play it a little safe this first time, because we want you to come back again. And so I had to think about that, and I think using Art Blakey's version of A Night in Tunisia has a little bit of complication in there because it's Art Blakey, so it's like experimental drumming, but at the same time, it's A Night in Tunisia. It's a song that people recognize. Hey, Renae.
Hi, Renae.
But at the same time, I had someone voguing with a bag of Cheetos. So like, there's a lot of layers there.
Got you.
And then the next time, I can make a piece about mass incarceration.
Amazing. Got you. Hi, Renae. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Yes, we were just talking about creating and some of Kyle's commissions on numerous companies and just what the expectations are when he goes into those spaces and, how he deals with those. For those who do not know, I'm going to read a little bit of Renae's resume as well. Yes. Renae Williams Niles has been working in the arts for over 26 years, serving in many capacities, including dance company manager, grant maker, presenter / guest curator, chief fundraiser, moderator / speaker, panelist / judge, and board member. She was most recently the first Associate Dean of Administration, Chief Operating Officer for the USC Gloria Kaufman School of Dance. There, she oversaw administration, code-led its equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts, and authored the school's 5-year EDI plan. She also held the position of Director of Advancement for the school. Previously, she worked for the Music Center, eventually serving as the Vice President of Programming there. She curated the presentation of 50 internationally acclaimed ballet and contemporary companies, led the commissioning of new works and projects such as LA Dance Project and Slow Dancing, multidisciplinary collaborations with LA Opera, LA Philharmonic, and Center Theater Group, as well as created new programs such as the site-specific Moves After Dark and the main stage project Ballet Now. She also oversaw family programming and DIY / participatory art making. She continues to advise colleagues and guest curate for various organizations, including the LA Philharmonic and the Joyce Theater in New York. there's many other notes here, but I'm going to stop there because, yes, that was a lot. But yeah, I kind of started the same way with Kyle and just asked him, how he feels hearing all of those accolades, associated with his name when I read them for him. So maybe you can also share what it's like to be where you are and to hear your past and, see how far you've come.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's an honor to share any platform with both of you, so thank you for this. And I think in response to hearing that, I guess there's both a sense of, I feel very privileged to have been able to do certain things, but it's also never enough.
Mm-hmm.
I think with every position and role that I've held, a big part of sometimes my transition is I look back and there's always something that I wish I would have done and wish I would have accomplished. And maybe it's the Virgo in me, I don't know, but there's always, I definitely have this sense, and I think I even parent that way, that there's just always more to be done, to make better. So maybe that's that can also serve as a motivator to keep going.
Cool. Never enough. Yeah, and Kyle, I don't know if you know this, but I've known Renae since I was probably like 10 years old.
Oh my God.
Yeah, Renae, I guess, was the company manager for Lula Washington Dance Theater in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I was in the school, so I would just be like, oh, there's Renae. And then I feel like we reconnected when I was dancing for Luna Negra Dance Theater in Chicago, and I reached out because I saw that she was working at the Music Center. And I was just trying to advocate for the company because, I felt that we were doing really great work and it was just not really seen. And I just looked up the email actually, and it was kind of the first time thinking about, the politics and dynamics that play into who gets programmed at these bigger houses. And for those also who don't know, the Music Center is pretty much the equivalent of Lincoln Center in Los Angeles. It's the biggest institution for the arts, performing arts that we have. So yeah, maybe just to start there, like, can you speak about, I know that I was trying to pitch the company for you and you said, that you would keep an eye out for when we have a larger, more streamlined performance for the Music Center. And can you just talk about kind of the conversations that you have behind the scenes when it goes to programming a season for an institution as big as that?
Sure. And I think, to your point, a lot of it does eventually come down to the individual a lot of times. So, my reality at the Music Center is quite different than my role at the Joyce as a guest curator. The venue and the landscape typically determines a lot of the decision making. And by that, I mean, for me at the Music Center, when I came in 2004, it was still, the series had only been around for 1 year. So it was still brand new. But the reality is the Music Center itself was 40 years old, but there was so much that existed already in Los Angeles. And I'm a strong believer in collaboration. I'm a strong believer in each of us having a distinct and complementary role. So I did a lot of research in terms of the dance presenting landscape that existed when I came into the Music Center, to really strategize what's the role that the Music Center could play that is complementary to what else existed. I think what was also interesting too, when you think about it, over the 11, 12 seasons I was at the Music Center, that Los Angeles landscape had evolved as well.
Right.
We had the Broad Stage, we had the Wallace, we had Cal State Northridge, which is now the Soraya. And so with that, I just continued to examine what the role could be.
Mm-hmm.
The other reality is I had unionized venues, both inside and outside. So even on the plaza, we still needed to use, of course, our great union crew. And then on top of that, the venue that I had the most access to was 3,000 seats. You know, just really intimate house, very warm. And there's financial realities of that. So the cost of even coming onto stage without any marketing, without any box office, was easily $30,000 to $50,000 just in crew. So to be cost effective, what I realized is that I needed to be able to bring something in, obviously, for more than a day.
Right.
So what was going to potentially draw upwards to 9,000 individuals at a particular price point. So that really determined a lot of that decision making, which was honestly, for me personally, frustrating. Because there were certain artists whose work was best experienced in a more intimate setting, whose work I felt strongly needed to be seen, particularly in Los Angeles. So there were a lot of times where I tried to see a lot of work as much as I could, whether it seemed it could fit into such a large venue or not. And then I would, let's just say, encourage my peers and my colleagues to consider companies and artists. The other deciding factor I would say is if there was a company that had a broad range of repertory, and let's say they could, the work could both be experienced well in a 1,000-seat house as well as a 3,000-seat house. One of the things that I would also look to do is that differential for what might come into the music center might have a live orchestra, might have more set, might be more elaborate. So again, trying to be complementary with what my colleagues could do and present really well, even in those situations where it might be the same company, but they have such a range of repertory.
Yeah, I guess before you got on, or maybe as you were coming on, Kyle was kind of discussing his first work on Ailey. One of the administrators there were saying that he should play it safe, because they wanted him back. And so when I hear you talk about kind of the risk factor in presenting something that might not sell, I guess, can you speak about, was there ever a time in the Music Center, your trajectory there, was there a time that you did take a risk on a company that you might not have because of the financial reality of, if they would sell tickets or not, and kind of how that plays into the career of a company or a choreographer, because, it is that risk that sets everything up for someone. Yeah.
When I was at the Music Center, especially the first few seasons, everything felt like a risk. What I tried to distinguish, though, was, for me, there's a difference between an artistic risk versus a financial one. And so what I really tried to do is I took some financial risks, but and then there was a couple of times where I think I did push the limits of the Chandler, where a work or a company might have been better experienced in the Amundsen. And yes, the Amundsen is still 1,700 seats at its smallest, but it feels a lot more intimate than the Chandler. But another big challenge for me is the resident companies had first right. So I received the leftover space. So if a company like Luna Negra is touring, the 4 days I might have available might not always align with the company. So that was always a big frustration, where there were some companies, it could take 4 or 5 years before the dates lined up, and that was frequently the case. I think, at one point I had complexions, and I'm sure for a lot of people it wouldn't appear to be a risk, but with that kind of venue, and in the past they had done so well in the Amundsen, I didn't have the Amundsen available, and really wanted to be part of a project early on, especially when I started co-commissioning work on behalf of the Music Center. So it was a bit of a risk moving them into the Chandler. Presenting Shin Wei on the stage of Walt Disney Concert Hall, that was the first time I used Disney. Keep in mind that the work required the usage of paint. So you can imagine how nervous everyone at the LA Phil was about me not only bringing in dance and movement, we also had to mask the stage because Shin Wei wanted it to be the appearance of a black box. I learned my lesson there. You go into a space and you respect that space.
Yeah.
And you use what you have to the best of its ability. Don't try to make it anything it isn't. That was a lesson learned for me as a presenter. So definitely some of those risks. I would say moves after dark was a big risk. It took me a few years to actually mount it. And for me, it was also only a starting point to be able to support and work artists that are right here in our own backyard. While I never saw it as an end. I just saw it as a beginning point. Be able to do that, and to also be more creative with our spaces as well. So certainly different risk, and I think in a lot of ways the most rewarding. And you were talking about Kyle's work with Ailey. Sometimes what I would do with the repertory company, like the Ailey Company, and also I did this with Correa Ballet out of Spain, which no longer exists. But to be able to present Kyle's work, Camille's work, Ron Brown's work, and then make a connection, have our audience make a true emotional connection with those artists and those works, with the idea of also eventually bringing those companies as well, specific artist-led companies. And that was something that I did do with Ron's company in collaboration with the Red Cat.
Cool. As I hear you speak, also going back to kind of Kyle's and I's conversation about, we spoke about Kyle and Alonzo King are the only two African-American choreographers that have choreographed on Hubbard Street outside of people that were in the dance company there. And Kyle is one of maybe a handful that have choreographed at New York City Ballet, and just his experience there. And maybe you can speak to the pressure or the feeling of needing to represent your race when you are the only one in these spaces. And I know that you just, were at USC, and don't know if you were the only one there, but I can assume maybe it's there as well. But yeah, just your experience there and what kind of pressures that puts you under. And, aside from wanting to do a good job just from your own Virgo nature, but just what you represent around that.
I don't know if this is because I was raised in the South, but I have always had a sense that I represent the totality of my race. I can remember that as, being an 8-year-old in the middle of Knoxville, Tennessee. And I think also in some cases, even growing up, one of my elementary schools was predominantly white. So I think that becomes, at least for me, it became something that I carried. Mm. And I still do. And I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing, but I think I kind of impose that on my own kids as well. I think, so for me, that was always a reality, whether I'm the only one in the room or I'm one of 5 in the room. Certainly that was the case for me at the Music Center. And I would say I wasn't the only senior leader. I was very fortunate. There was, and she's still there. And so I wasn't the only Black woman senior leadership at the Music Center, but certainly there were very few. But I think to your point, as a presenter, particularly a presenter of an institution that is not culturally specific, and being in that lead presenter role, it was quite often that I was the only, particularly outside of the country. I definitely surprised a few people, I think, when they saw who I was and what I did, particularly when I went to Cuba. So that is, I think in a lot of ways, that is something that that speaks to the certain decisions I make, perhaps. And I think what was interesting for me at USC, so being a student at USC 25 years ago and then going back, it was definitely a different campus, in a lot of ways, a slightly better campus, although still a lack of acceptance and responsibility for its long history of racism. But certainly there was a lot more diversity, and particularly within USC Kaufman, there was a lot more. But still, yes, at a senior level, I was one of very few. Even when I was overseeing advancement and would get together campus-wide, there were a lot that worked in advancement, but there were a handful of us that were the chief development officers at such a large institution. I think, though, what I would say shifted for me, while of course I have my own very personal experiences that I think are valid, once I was charged with co-leading our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, that role and responsibility that I carry, particularly in this body, that shifted for me. And the level of clarity around the necessity of calling things out, of making things better for that next generation. That's been very clear to me as a mother, but at a university, seeing these artists who look up to both of you, who want to be valid and valued for what they want to give and their contribution. And so I definitely felt a stronger role of, I need to make this better and possible for them.
Thank you. Kyle, going back to Renae, Kyle and I spoke about kind of like a triggering moment, not triggering, a springboard moment that happened for him that kind of like set him to the next level. And he was saying when he presented the radio show in New York, and how, I guess, the second night after rave reviews from the first night, it was a snowstorm and it was sold out, and there were so many people there. And Kyle, kind of on that note, I just want to talk to you, well, both of you, about the importance as a choreographer and also as a presenter of the demographics of the people that are coming to your shows. And if there is an effort that you make to specifically get people of color into these shows, because I know my experience as a dancer, whenever we would tour with numerous companies, whether they were contemporary ballet companies or contemporary companies, whatever, in any part of the country or abroad, the demographic of the audience was white, pretty much 95%. So yeah, just your experience with that, and how maybe in these times, if it's shifting at all for you, the importance of who's coming to see the work and what it means for the future. Kyle, maybe if you want to start.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think, well, before I get into it, I have to go back to the Ailey thing. I definitely think he was looking out for my best interest and gave me an example of another choreographer who we all know and love, who was actually highly celebrated, but only made one dance for the Ailey company. I won't say who that choreographer is because it would, whatever.
I'm going back in the repertory list. So.
Yeah, but this is like a very known and celebrated choreographer that was never asked back because the first dance they made was a little too much of a challenge for their audience. So I think he was just looking out for my best interest by saying that. Now, to the question, I mean, it's always been part of the work that I do to try to do different kind of community engagement activities that hopefully bring us all the more into the theater. And sometimes I make work where that's not the end goal, really. When I made a work like Dearest Home, that's looking at love, belonging, and loss, I was trying to connect a lot with LGBTQ plus senior citizens and teens and connect them to kind of build an organic mentorship. Yes, it's great if they saw the show, but it was more important for me to kind of make this kind of organic mentorship happen and to kind of connect with them in a really personal way, and kind of think about how I can build on these conversations in a way that is healing for everyone. I definitely needed that healing for myself. And I think hopefully it inspired them and inspired my collaborators on the stage. But as I continue to make work, I think because of my history working in museums, working at the Andy Warhol Museum, and trying to kind of being an educator at the museum, you always have to think about how you can connect people to the work that you're making or that you're presenting. And so for me, making work where I say to anyone that I'm talking to about audience and audience engagement, that it's important for me to have the person that goes to the corner store, and it's important to have the person that owns the corner store at my show. Mm-hmm. That's always been a thing. There are different ways that I try and go about that depending on the program. When I'm in a city like Seattle, which sometimes you're not going to see, it's like, where are the brothers and sisters? But they're there. So, and I got to get a cut, right? So I'm going to go to the barber shop. I'm going to talk to the barber about my show, and I just may happen to have a flyer or two with me, and it's a good date, so it's just about finding different points of entry to talk about the work and engage people, if that is part of your own mission. I want to make the work, I'm interested in the conversation. Like, I definitely want to see my people there, and I want to see my community there, because I'd like to think that I make work that is highlighting and celebrating our community. But it's also important for people that aren't from our community to see that work and to see the ways in which I'm hoping to present my people and kind of make the space one that people feel like they can engage in conversations that can move us all forward in some way. But I definitely hope that a lot of the work that we do is not only uplifting, but is, I don't want to say inclusive because that can sound a little hokey in this day and age, but continues to stay honest, I guess, but also enticing. I don't know, enticing can seem weird too. Relative. I guess that's the thing. I want it to always be relative. Making a work like an Untitled Love that's all using D'Angelo's music, you know, what we do in that process, we're going to reaching out to churches, we're reaching out to different local organizations and playing card games that are really primarily connected to our community. We're playing spades, bid whiz, tonk, 500, and we're asking if we can engage in stories about love, like talk about your relationship in your 50-year marriage. There had to be some tribulations in there. Can we talk about those while we're playing cards and while we're eating, you know, whatever food we've been able to set forward for everybody to just kind of connect with? And then when people see the work after we've had these conversations, that's not the end game. I want to have a brunch the next day. I don't want to do the standard post-performance discussion or Q&A. Let's now, you see in the show, let's have a very informal, just hang time where we just talk and we eat, and maybe you feel comfortable now talking about what you saw. That to me is a whole other level of kind of feeling like a show is successful. Maybe they come in for free food, but maybe they're also coming because they felt included and they felt intrigued. And that's a big part of what we want to be doing, in my mind, as artists and arts presenters as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Renae?
It's just, I'm now having all these memories and flashbacks of different Kyle works. So I just, if you see me in this glow, it's because I'm remembering all of it. I would say, you know, for me at the Music Center in particular, I had just come from running the grants program for LA County. So I think I had a huge sense of like county responsibility, and the Music Center is a county facility. So yes, I wanted as much as possible for that audience every single time to look like LA County. And I think one of my proudest moments was the first year I had the Ailey Company there. I go backstage during the first intermission, and someone says to me, "Judy's looking for you." Mind you, she had met me a few times when I was managing Lula. I don't think she had any clue who I was, but okay, Judy's looking for me. So she's on stage, and I, you know, walked towards her, and she said, all she's saying to me is, "You did this. Did you do this?" And I'm like, oh no. Did I ask them for too much outreach? What did I do, right? Because as Kyle said, there has to be as much community engagement on multiple levels, before, during, and after. And so I felt like maybe I asked too much. And then she said, "Did you get this audience?" She said, "In all the years we've been in Los Angeles, it has never felt like that."
Wow.
Because as Kyle said, right, we went to the churches, I did sororities and fraternities, I did nail salons and hair salons. And we also, not just within the Black community, but we specifically targeted like 24 to 44, because even Ailey realized there was a generational gap. And I can say 8 out of the 10 people that called for tickets, because people were still calling back then, they didn't even know how to pronounce the word Ailey.
Wow.
That's when I knew we were achieving something. So yes, I whether it was Ballet Hispanico or Cloud Gates, that was a constant priority.
Amazing. Yeah, I guess we can like start to wrap up. Yeah, I guess just from my perspective, you know, working as a dancer and now as like choreographer, director, I see the kind of lack of, I work primarily now in the museum space and just a kind of outside of proscenium. And the more artists that I interact with outside of dance, I just realize kind of how insular dance is and how a lot of dance is kind of created for other dancers, and how that kind of keeps us in this world of like, we're only making work for each other. And Yeah, just maybe if you could speak on like the importance of bringing outside people. I mean, I know we're talking about demographics now of like who's coming, but also people who don't understand dance or people who don't understand the arts, or the importance of like how you were saying you're working with Andy Warhol, the museum there, how important it is to get people to equate dance on a more visual art or more a genre of art that is more accessible, such as fashion or music, or how important that is to bring dance and kind of into a new realm, so that it's not this niche thing as it has been forever. Yeah.
Should I go?
Kyle.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I I don't know about the insular aspect of it. Maybe it's because of what interests me. Like I'm not really interested in kind of insular art in general.
Mhm.
Um, I think the bigger thing is to just make sure that everyone feels that what they see, what they see, and or what they feel is right. I don't think people need to go to any type of show and feel anything. It's great if they do, or to understand it or to get it. I think if you're thinking about that, you wasted your time in the viewing process trying to wrap your head around what you're supposed to see and what you're supposed to
Mhm.
get instead of just experiencing it and living in it. So I hope that we can kind of continue to strip down those walls, so people can just be present, and experience it however they do experience it. I think that's what makes it all the more meaningful.
Mhm.
Um, I think, Chris, you bring up a huge point and perhaps an opportunity for us all to continue to figure out ways that dance movement can be as accessible as possible. And while it might not be uh, subjectively or objectively good, the reality is these social media platforms, I think, certainly for me, someone who started presenting in 2004, it's a different reality
Mhm.
than it was back then. Um, and so, like I said, good or bad, which I strongly feel is so subjective with all forms of art, um, certainly that access to it. We were just watching something last night on uh, on TV, on I think it was Lifetime, and there was an ad break that literally had a single choreographer dancer, and she said, which one do you like, A or B? So not only is it about the viewing, but it's about the critiquing, which I thought was interesting in this very mainstream outlet. So I think, especially at this particular time, um, with COVID, as more and more of our esteemed and highly valued dance makers are also using these platforms and further diversifying what is available on someone's phone, I actually think it will only do us all good.
Mhm. Cool.
I get worried about that. I think it's because I just value the live performance thing so much.
Oh,
And I think like, I'm not the biggest, like I have issues with the whole TikTok thing. I think maybe because my favorite thing about choreography and artistry from watching a dancer is transitions. And
Mhm.
it's kind of the whole point is to be void of transitions. So I'm like, ah.
yeah. No, I totally agree with you, Kyle. And I think, a lot of people are assuming that I'm watching a lot of dance, right? You're talking to someone who did 3 years of national dance projects and easily had to review, 400 videos. So yes, it is not my preference either. But I think, and my hope is, especially artists like both of you, that can still carry that same integrity. And how can that happen? Is it possible
Mhm.
using those platforms? And then it's my hope, bringing people into that very unique live experience, because I totally agree with you. There's nothing like it.
Yeah.
And there shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, that's all I got. Thank you guys. This was really great. And is there anything else that maybe one of you wanted to discuss or ask each other a question or anything?
I don't know. I think you have me like thinking. I know we're like almost out of time. I just like that whole like, like the accessible thing is like such a big comment, or like thinking about like even just like these like pockets of a community. And I think even in my LA time, I'm always still trying to figure out how the city really is inclusive. So to even these different pockets of a dance community.
Mm-hmm.
And even like, I mean, dance humor is its own thing, because sometimes the jokes are really only for your friends, as you were saying, and that drives me crazy. But other than that, I think there's just a lot to process, that I'm always still kind of like trying to figure out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like LA is on a precipice of change. Like you were saying, Renae, how much it's changed in the last 10, 15 years. Yeah, it seems like there's more space to fail here because there's less institutional support. So I feel like people are kind of just doing it on their own, and they're just like, oh, I'm going to try this, you know, which I think is really important. Whereas like what you were saying, Kyle, you know, it's like in New York, the hustle, the grind, and obviously that's in every city, but when there's just a bit more space and room to do that, it just seems like there's more room for growth. And yeah, it's really cool to have you in both coasts and Renae.
Thanks, but I guess for both of you, I know we're ending, but like, how does the word get spread about the works that people are making in these like more austere or more kind of quiet spaces? Because then it stays insular. So how does someone making work in Frogtown know about the show and build an audience in West Adams? And how are they in conversation in a way that it's not about somebody getting support versus someone else, but that we're all part of the same community, and what you do is valid and what you do is valid?
For me, when I started going to other types of shows, like art shows and music shows, and, you know, and just seeing like, wow, there's so many young, hip kids here, and seeing, again, the demographics of the people that were there, I was just like, oh, I need to figure out, you know, how to get these people to my show and why they feel that this abstract visual art opening is more captivating than a dance performance. Because in my mind, I'm like, I can access someone moving their body more so than I can with this abstract painting. But that's my dance focused mind, and obviously everyone doesn't think that way. But yeah, then I started thinking like, oh, maybe I should collaborate with people that are more in the worlds that I'm interested in, such as fashion. So I began collaborating with a fashion designer friend of mine, and was able to kind of bring his audience in to see what we were doing, and them connecting the dots of like, oh, these two things can mesh, and I can find just ways to access both and ways to appreciate both. And yeah, just the more collaboration that I've done with commercial artists, and kind of also branching into what is popular and what is accessible now, but also staying true to what I do. Yeah, it's just kind of caught people. I know we're talking about TikTok. And yeah, it just seems there is a way to kind of like take what is the most kind of prevalent in these kind of instant popular things, and to bring them into our worlds. I don't know, and that's kind of how like I started to grow our audience. And yeah. Also, LA is so huge. Yeah, Renae, maybe you can also talk about, you know, just what you're saying about LA County and how like vast it is. And yeah.
Oh, yes. I think also, you know, as a presenter and being at the Music Center, and that was something that also dramatically changed, was downtown and living downtown. let's just be honest, 15 years ago, 17 years ago, if you said you were living downtown, people were a little concerned. And now that is no longer the case. So that was something towards the end of my tenure at the Music Center that we were working to develop some really thoughtful strategies, because to your point about, Los Angeles and LA County, the realities of traversing and getting from one space to another. But let's be honest, people will do it, right? And this whole notion of a shorter attention span, I can't buy into that. I think that if work is engaging and speaks to someone, it doesn't have to be minimized. So I still hold on to that, and I'm still hopeful as well.
Do you find that in New York, Kyle, like people not wanting to trek to Brooklyn for something, or like, it doesn't really seem...
I don't think it's the same. I think in LA, it's kind of acceptable and accepted in some way. That's like, oh, that's on the east side. Oh, that's on the west side. I'm not gonna go. But then there's also, I mean, maybe it's also, I don't know. I mean, I think Christy Edmonds does a great job of bringing people to all the way to UCLA to see the works there, and maybe and I think like some of those works do kind of maybe connect with a visual art world, which maybe has a connection in some ways to more East LA, perhaps. I don't know. I think clearly I don't know what she does, but I think, or what Renae does either. I think, I think there's something to that. Like how did these communities kind of, how do they stay in conversation? I think that's one massive difference. It's also thinking about kind of dance criticism and PR in Los Angeles. It's very different than it is in New York. I feel like in LA, you're much more dependent on kind of blogs, because there's not as many stories that are given to not only visiting dance companies to LA, but to LA-based dance companies and dance makers. So how are people hearing about the work? And if you were really in these insular communities, how are then people hearing on the other side of town about your work? And I think, it's such a struggle. Yeah. Even here, there's so many blogs separate from things like the Times and whatever else that are featuring shows or newspapers in Harlem. There's just so much. There's Charmaine Warren. There's Eva Yayasantawa. Like, there are people there's Dance NYC. There's a lot of different ways to find out about what's happening here in a way that it's a lot harder to hear in Los Angeles. Yeah. But it's also like something that you were saying about visual art. I've never really understood why dance isn't considered a visual art. I mean, with the exception of like maybe what Michelle Dorrance says sometimes, because it's so audible. Dance is 100% a visual art. So like, can we get those coins? You know what I'm saying? It's just such a crazy thing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe you can also speak to, because you were saying how you also work in the museum space, and the difference between the value on performance art versus dance. And I don't know, I guess I just heard about recently and was following his work. What is his name? Tino Segal. He just had something with the hammer. And I've heard that he's one of the highest paid performance artists, and his work is primarily in dance. And also Brendan Fernandez is another performance artist who uses ballet vernacular, but calls it performance art. And just the difference, and I mean, I don't know what the checks look like, but I assume that they are quite high, as, performance art and work in that space just seems to be valued higher than work in the proscenium. Yeah, and just kind of what that means to you.
Sure. I don't know if I think it's valued higher. I think it's just a different commodification of art, um, and how we as makers and how people who support art look at that in some way. I think Adam Linder is another, like, again, thing about LA. Like, he's someone who actually wants to make these kind of like art pieces that are sellable, um, and goes about the conversation and interaction exchange with the presenter or curator with that in mind.
Mhm.
But there's these wonderful stories that in the last few years in particular about like some of the presentations that have been happening at MoMA over the last few years, or different museum spaces, where we're also thinking about how the performing arts are preserved, um, especially after an artist passes on. How does that, yeah, how does that work live, and how does that catalog stay accessible, and yeah, how does that separate level of kind of value come into play? If you think about people who make a lot of conceptual work, they're not always even on hand for the installation of that work. They just may say, these are the instructions for you to make this thing that I came up with, right? So I conceived this project, but Saul, right? Like, some of that is like insanely amazing work. You will say to like Yale's art department, I need you to go and put this up. And you may not even be paid for it because you're just happy you're doing this Soloway project, right? So like, thinking about all of those things, it's a very different conversation around the commodification of our art form, and the way that we actually, I think, are valuing our collaborators. Because I don't think in this day and age, I don't know if anyone wants to, but I'd like to think that we are always paying dancers when we're doing projects. And sometimes in that performance artwork, I don't think it's a thing where one thing is better or higher than the other, but there's so many different points of entry into how we make work, and how our time is spent, that I don't even think it is helpful for necessarily even say, because someone spent 2 weeks on something, it should be valued less than someone that spent 2 years on something. It's just a different approach to the work, and it's all valid. Ultimately, it's just saying support the arts.
Yeah, I guess when I say valued higher, I guess I reference just even the conversations about it, like what you're saying. And there are hundreds of art magazines that critique and compare and contrast artists, and there is one dance magazine. So just that level of even just analysis of what we're doing versus a performance artist or someone who is working in that space, where there seems to be more just conversation around what it is and why it's important to analyze what we're watching. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Renae, I don't know if you want to expand on this as well, but I think, even thinking about some of those publications, yeah, these are national publications, Dance Magazine, Point Magazine, Dance Spirit, whatever, Black Dance Magazine. But then there's also, ironically now, Art Forum also covers dance, and I do mean dance, so separate from performance art. And I think that's, again, part of this interesting thing about this visual art aspect to what we do, because there's a whole other kind of critique and critical eye on the work. How are they looking at the bodies in space? How are they looking at costume? There's something really exciting about art curators and art critics looking at dance work. But at the same time, I think it's also really important that people educate themselves on how to really see dance, if there is supposed to be a way to go about critiquing that work, because there's always been conversations around histories and culture, right? So how are people critiquing work when they may not know the point of entry or know anything about the culture?
Yeah.
there's definitely ellipses or two that follow that, but
Right. Renae, any thoughts?
I'm just compelled, I think, by the conversation. I think what could also be part of that financial construct is, how many partners are there in terms of supporting performance art at a particular level versus any other platform. And so, there might be a really high profile project, but then they could go 3 years without another high profile project. So I think, and that's pre-COVID. So I think that that's probably part of this reality as well. Hearing Kyle talk about dance as a visual art form, I totally agree. And in fact, it makes me think that on a few occasions, when the dance critic wasn't available, sometimes the music critic would come. And so to Kyle's point, is that truly, in terms of the base of understanding and knowledge, let alone if the work is coming from a non-Eurocentric perspective, is that really the best critic? And certainly here in Los Angeles, that has evolved. Even the time I was at the Music Center, that reality of dance criticism at a full-time level has greatly shifted. And so even the work of a publicist looks different than it did 10, 15 years ago. And I think also, Kyle, to your point, a lot of it still feels very disjointed, not as connected as it could be or should be. So I think, to me, that's just, it's another opportunity to make that change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think about, I guess, the importance also of, going back to social media, and sometimes it's seeming like now I'll see companies commissioning choreographers that have zero experience working with concert dance companies, but will hire them based on their social media following and what they've been able to present in that space, which I think also kind of plays into, trying to stay contemporary and trying to stay accessible, but also, I guess, letting the lack of knowledge on dance kind of lead where it's going. It's scary to say, but
pull my ponytail.
That just says it all, Kyle. Says it all. Well, and where I've seen it as well is, if I can dare say, children teaching dance.
master classes
At the age of 14. Yeah. There's a lot.
So look down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need a word or two, Kyle. Come on.
Yeah. It's all very tricky, and at times dangerous. And my relationship to social media is a very precarious one. I think I have to always acknowledge that if it wasn't for social media, I don't know if white people would believe that so many wrongdoings were happening in this country as they are. I think because they don't have to see it, they weren't seeing it. And so I think a lot of white people in particular have been like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening in this country. That just happened to my neighbor. What? And I think that's like a whole new thing. So we have to thank social media for that. Other than that, I just think there's a lot of issues around the ways in which things are valued in social media, the ways in which some of the immediacy, the shifts in the ways in which things are exposed is problematic to me. But I also come from a very, maybe kind of like in between generations, on this call, right? So like for me, thinking about like my teachers talking about like, I when I was taught choreography, maybe I was given the VHS tape, but if I wasn't, I always, even if I was, I still left that rehearsal and wrote down all of the choreography. Like I wrote it down. And I would show up for work knowing that if I didn't know that choreography, there'd be a big problem and maybe I would get fired. Mm-hmm. And nowadays you can't even think that way. You can't say, oh, well, I'm going to give them however long to go over the choreography. Or let me look at the video. Like they'd say, oh, let me look at the video first. And that's not just my dancers. That's just a lot of dancers in general, where that's not something that would be okay before you had to know what you were doing. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, the whole landscape is shifting. Accountability has shifted. And I think maybe that's a bigger thing with social media in general. On the good and the bad. For me, it's just the kind of power of accountability and visibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe just one last thing to close on that accountability note. Just how your thoughts on, again, these social media posts about these different, specifically white institutions that are posting about, solidarity with Black people. And that seems to be it, just the post, and how there is no real action behind the scenes in their past. And if there is a future for it, where is the accountability, and how do we know that there are going to be steps going forward, and how do we know it's not just a publicity stunt? Yeah.
Only time will tell, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly bothersome. And this was actually something, I'm on the APAT board, and this was something that we talked about as well, with a great number of our own membership, frankly, that in the statements, as you were saying, was no acknowledgement or responsibility for their own history and their own past. And some of them even have, some action items, because after the first couple of weeks of the statements, some people started to learn. Some clearly sought some counsel in order to make some best next steps, particularly depending on their employee base, right? So I found those that at least have some level of diversity or have a vocal Black employee base did things a little differently. But it was hard. It continues to be hard to hear and to see these. But to Kyle's point, certainly for me, the LA rebellion of the 90s around Rodney King, I was a student at USC. I lived off of Normandy. I was one of those few people that lived in the community before attending USC, especially back then, even fewer, and was legitimately there because of affirmative action, which I was reminded of on a regular basis. But I think very much, Kyle, to your point, social media already has made a difference. And as a parent, as someone who wants to see things be different and be better, I have to have a certain amount of hope that things are going to look different. But I also recognize my responsibility is not just to try to live and represent in a certain way, but to also be more vocal and to work to call out my own friends and colleagues And I recognize that now.
Mm.
I also think it helps me a little older. Let's be honest, when you're 25, calling someone out, you're not even sure if you're going to be able to keep your job, right? Or end up walking into a hostile work environment. But when you're in charge of that work environment, that I think that changes things.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with you, Chris, in terms of those statements. And like I said, only time will really be that indicator.
Yeah, I think totally in agreement. I think, there's so much there though, right? It's like some similar conversation. We were having a similar conversation in our workshop this past week with my company. And I was bringing up some of my issues around like the call out thing. And what came up was calling in. So how can we bring people in so that it's not about accusing people or like being like, you're not doing this thing. It's like, listen, let me talk to you for a second. In the same way that like our elders would be doing to us, granted they're not necessarily our family, but like how can we bring people in? David Dorfman, I always would say, when I danced with him, he would talk about invite versus indict. So yeah, sometimes you have to bring people in to tell them what's going on instead of just pointing the finger or looking for the instant receipts. So I think that's a big part of it. Hopefully people are genuinely receptive to wanting to hear. I'm sure everybody on the Zoom call got a lot of text messages from white friends that you ain't heard from, like, how you doing? And I'm like, what, something happened? Somebody died? I don't know. Like,
what's different, right?
Yeah, like what's different? I mean, I was black and gay and poor yesterday, still today. I mean, so I don't know. I think the thing that's had me really emotional was like driving through like Silver Lake and seeing like, it's great to see people out with picket signs and everything, but I'm like, are y'all gonna be here next week? Are you gonna be here when you're called back to work? Like, how much will this change be part of your DNA? Because it's not technically in your DNA.
Right.
And that's the thing that kind of is worrisome, or looking at recent pollings. And I'm not talking about political leanings necessarily, but it makes sense that right now in a lot of places, Trump has 49% to Biden's 40. Yeah. I get it. People don't want to give up their privilege. I get it. Yeah. Like, we don't know where we would be if the roles were reversed. We don't know. We can't put ourselves in their shoes because we were never invited into the shoe store. So it's just not the same conversation. But I don't know. I think like, what Renae's saying, it's in some ways kind of going back to what we've all kind of been kind of indoctrinated into us in church, right? It's like walk by faith, not by sight, right? But at the same time, we need to walk with a little bit of side eye. We have to like, you can only be but so trusting towards ignorance. Yeah. So ideally, we make the space, not like we haven't been doing that all along, but we make the space to support our community that much more, and put more effort into that than to, kind of looking negatively on anyone else or any other institution. It's like we can talk about certain like ballet institutions and what they haven't been doing, or we can look to what we can do in our community to uplift our community that much more. And I think that's more where I'd want to be putting my energy. I mean, granted, kind of like Renae's saying as well, it's like we're at different places, right? Than, the kind of like emerging folks. Although I'd like to think we're always emerging. I don't want to plateau. But still, I mean, I think, yes, I can get a text or a call from someone who runs one of those companies that is a primarily white run organization. And I can at the same time take the space to be thinking about what I need to do for my company and talk to other friends and collaborators and think about how I can uplift them and make sure that I'm saying their names all the more in meetings and interviews and whatnot to uplift their voices in their business. even though I'm wearing a very white. I'm like, that's Irish.
Amazing. Thank you both.
I don't have my Diggable Planet t-shirt anywhere. I don't know. I'm gonna help tell people. What do you expect?
Love it. You do you, Kyle.
Yeah, you know, whatever.
Cranberries one day, Diggable Planets the next day.
Yeah, Linger was my jam. So it is what it is.
Love it.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. This was great. Yeah, it was really important to me to do this. Because, yeah, like you said, I have called some folks out on the internet and felt it was time to redirect my narrative and to bring a little bit more insight into the behind the scenes of things, and to just speak with other major players in the field around their experience, and yeah, how we can keep going and how we can progress during these times, and how backtracking is not an option. So yeah, and also to give some hope to the younger people who are trying to get to the levels that both of you are at, you know, just how to get there. So thank you for taking the time, and yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Stewardship.
Thank you for having us, and for bringing us together in this way. Yeah, and hopefully it's helpful and impactful. To Kyle's point, I know that I'm continuing to learn, and especially, you know, figuring out, making sure that we can be allies to our own selves, in our own communities. And what does that mean? What does that look like? So I continue to learn from both of you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, very much agreed, and like ditto quotes. And I also say that I also feel like, granted, it's hard for us to, it's hard for us to feel like we can rest, but part of me feels like, white people, why don't y'all do this one for us? Why don't why don't y'all go and find, you know, Breonna Taylor's killer? Why don't y'all go out and do this one for us? Yeah, we've been doing this for a good while, you know. But that said, yes, I 100% always learning. I'm very grateful to have dancers in my company who are 10 or more years younger than me to be learning from on a daily basis, and to have fellow choreographers and change makers like the both of you to help keep me inspired and on my toes and energized.
Cool. Yes. Thank you. All right. Well, enjoy your Saturday. Thank you for taking the time. Until next time. Yeah. Okay. Bye, guys. Thank you.